Hi, I'm Ashley Guzman, and welcome to another edition of Disaster Empire Quick Views, where we get up close with thought leaders and innovators in resilience. With us this time on the podcast is Aarti, and Dr. Aarti, as others may know her. And so I want to give her a few minutes just to briefly introduce herself to those who may not be aware of her yet.
Thank you, Ashley. That's great. Thanks so much for having me on. Really excited for this conversation, having seen some of the previous ones you've done. So that's great.
Thank you.
So where do I start? I suppose the easiest thing to say about my background is that it's a game of two halves. So whether that's soccer, American football, hockey, definitely two distinct phases of my career. The first really was from 2000 to 2017, when I worked in good old-fashioned security, risk management, business continuity, crisis management. So over that 17 years, I kind of cut my teeth on cyber in the early 2000s. Then I moved into security. And so I did a lot of work supporting multinationals that were going in to help with the reconstruction and rehabilitation of Iraq and Afghanistan, looking at security and risk planning. And then from 2008 onwards, I started to really focus in on crisis management, fell in love with that as a subject, and just this idea of how we support exactly, right? Just this idea of how do we build this capability and who needs to be involved. For 7 years, I set up and led the UK business of a Swedish risk and resilience provider. So that was a really interesting experience, both in terms of being the entrepreneur, growing a business, and at the same time delivering risk and resilience solutions. And in 2017, I just took a step back. I was kind of exhausted, because anyone who grows businesses knows that it's tough out there, right? But secondly, I kind of felt that we were really good at helping organizations build processes, plans, and frameworks. And everyone seemed to think that that meant that they would deliver excellent risk management and excellent crisis management. And I just kept coming back to the fact that unless and until we really understood what it takes for a human being to thrive, for a human being to be able to perform, to have the mindset, the behaviors, to be resilient, to be agile, that we really couldn't actually talk about organizational resilience as a capability, because the people are ultimately the people who push the buttons and pull the levers and make those decisions. So end of the first half of my career. And then the second half started really, which was in 2017, I founded Before Nine, my consultancy, really with this idea of bridging what individuals need in their workplace. So what does the employee need in terms of team dynamics, structures, leaders, environmental resources, capabilities, and what organizations need in terms of how to get the best out of their people, and really bringing those two together. And so I went off and did some qualifications in psychology and became an accredited coach so that I could really bring the world of psychology into the world of risk, resilience, and business. So I guess that's a little potted history. And that second half obviously has coincided with the pandemic, where people definitely were starting to say, wow, your two worlds have really come together. And I was like, yes, that's really why I went off to do what I did in 2017, because I just felt that that was key. So we basically support a whole range of government, universities, retailers, banks, power and utility companies with really this challenge of individual team and leadership performance in the context, I guess, of change, crisis and complexity.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And, thinking to COVID and the experience over the last few years, really, I think, great in terms of your business model, in that it really did bring together, the reasoning for why it's so important to bring the individual resilience together with the company resilience. So I guess if there's any benefit out of the last few years, it's kind of to prove you right? That there's really an importance to it.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because our whole industry is the one where often we're the ones saying, look, there's a different way of doing this and we think it might be better. And it often takes people a little while to get to the table. So yes, you're absolutely right. I think all resilience professionals working wherever they do in the world hate to be proven right, because it usually means something bad has happened, but also try to look at how we build on that, for learning, I think.
Exactly. Hey, before we jump in to do a deeper dive, can you share a fun fact about yourself that people may not know about you, or those who are just getting to know you would find fun and interesting?
Yeah, maybe perhaps less fun, but perhaps more interesting. So my PhD was on Tibet.
Ah,
So I
okay.
did that in the UK in the early 2000s. But as part of that, I had a one-to-one with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and we
Oh,
sat and had a
wow.
long
Wow. I'm
chat about.
envious of that. Amazing.
I feel very blessed and very lucky to
Yeah.
have had the opportunity. But yeah, so I guess you could say my interesting fact is that I've hung out with the Dalai Lama. You know.
Nice. And works right in alignment with what you're trying to do, right? What a resilient person and someone to
Mm.
talk to and learn from. Hey, as you are building before nine, what is you spoke to it just a little bit before, but can you do a deeper dive in the gap that you're really trying to fill
Mm.
for organizations and employees?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the gap is kind of, you can look at it almost from two perspectives. The first is that I think the traditional approach to developing people, so whether that's through learning and development teams or HR teams or training teams across any organization, has typically been, hey, let's go and send someone on a whole range of courses about how to be emotionally intelligent or
Yeah.
how to be well or how
Yeah.
to be resilient or how to be a great leader. And those courses are great, but ultimately they don't really touch the sides of the operational environment
Mm.
that those people are working in. So, it's all well and good to tell people working in an airport terminal that, this is what it means to be well, if actually they're shift-based workers and actually they have real challenges around well-being that come from the way that their environment and their shift and their pattern of working is set up. And so I suppose from one side, I had this feeling that bringing psychology into businesses still tended to be this isolated thing that
Mhm.
didn't really touch the side of who is this business? What are they trying to achieve? How is this improved well-being, resilience, performance actually going to deliver in that environment? And then I suppose the second lens, which is the one I guess I alluded to at the start, was just this idea that how can we give our exec any assurance about the readiness of our businesses to either respond to a crisis or to be able to navigate or deliver change and transformation programs,
Yeah.
whether that's digital or business, unless we are able to deliver a real capability assessment around our people. And there are so many different elements to that. Yes, there's, do they have the skills and do they have the technical knowledge and do they have the tools? But it's also about what they bring in terms of their own performance around how well and how well they function and how well they feel and how they flex that. So that's really the gap. And I think what's been really interesting for me is that whilst I've come from the organizational resilience, risk continuity, crisis management background, the early adopters of our approach have actually been the directors of change and transformation, the heads of change, who recognized from 2017 that, look, if we're going to design and deliver change and it's going to be complex and it's going to be difficult and people are going to find it challenging, how are we going to support them through that? I would say the resilience industry, of risk and crisis and continuity professionals are only now finally really getting to grips with this as a topic. So I mean, that's what we're trying to do. And I guess we're taking different audiences on the journey depending on how ready they are to listen.
Excellent. Hey, thank you for sharing more about that. And here's a question that I ask all of my guests is how do you define resilience?
Well, so I'm going to give you it from the context of the human being. And there are actually 122 definitions of human resilience, which is why I think we struggle in life, in the media, and in the world of
Absolutely.
business to define what resilience is. Because one
Yeah.
person will say it's being Teflon coated, and another one will say it's keeping going. So I'm
Yep.
going to give you three definitions, if I may.
Oh, go right ahead.
Okay, so the personal resilience definition that I use comes from a great female researcher in the UK, Carol Pemberton, and she looks at the personal resilience from the day we're born through to the day we die as really being our ability to be flexible in how we think, how we feel, and how we act when we're either faced by a sudden life disruption or a sustained period of pressure. And so already you can kind of see this theme of flexibility. Like, how am I going to change the thinking in this situation or change the way I feel? What am I going to do to change that up? Or what am I going to do to respond differently? But then I love the part at the end of her definition, which is so that we emerge stronger, wiser, and more able. And I guess I'll put that into context for you. Everyone in the pandemic, depending on how many lockdowns they went through, felt very tested by the first one. But by the second one, they had got into a groove about how they were going to work, how they were going to live, how they were going to interact. And that's because they had learned so much about themselves and what worked the first time that they were able to apply it the second time. Stronger, wiser, more able. And so I suppose in this definition, resilience is really this set of muscles that helps us to navigate these challenges, to cope, to sustain relatively normal levels of functioning, and still grow and transform as a result of what we're experiencing. I'm not going to share with you 3 definitions. I'm going to keep it at that one. But I will apply it to the employee lens, because I think that's what your audience are really interested in, right? So if we as human beings need to become more flexible in those thinking patterns, those ways of feeling, and not to say that the way we're thinking or feeling is wrong, but recognizing that they may not always be healthy or constructive, how do we flex them? Yeah. In the employee context, what organizations are really looking for from resilience in their people is this idea that they can manage and respond to everyday sources of stress, whether that's a difficult customer meeting or a challenging performance review, or the fact that you're 2 members of the team down for a week or 2 and you need to restructure how you're going to deliver a project. And so that you can kind of learn from them and you can bounce back from them and you can learn from the setbacks and the failures and be better prepared again. I think the challenge in organizational life is actually that we're just not living in the world of everyday stress anymore, right? COVID was not an everyday stressor. Some of the changes that are going on across industries are not everyday stresses. And so actually it becomes less about the individuals being able to manage stress and much more about how we set up our teams and we set up our resources and we set up our leaders and we create the culture around how we're actually going to operate responsibly and safely in a way that doesn't put all the responsibility for resilience on the individual, because it certainly isn't all on the individual. The individual plays a part of many different factors in an organization to sustain even that human form of resilience.
Aarti, thank you for that. There's so many great points there I'd love to unpack, and I think it would take hours to do it justice. But really like the idea of individuals coming out stronger, as they're building their resilience. Also love that you touched upon for companies. It's that it's not business as usual, but I think in the environment we've had from COVID, from the increase in events that companies are having to deal with, from economic, downturn worldwide, war in Ukraine, et cetera, business as usual, they're really starting to understand the continuity aspect, because there are things that could impact at a severe level, even at the daily, but now they're really understanding, taking it to that next step and really understanding how they can respond. And I like to think about not just respond well to events, and you understand the industry very well, but then thrive, through the events. And to me, that's not the goal anymore, is just the survival of the company or the individual for that matter, but really thriving at the end of it. And that's what I see as a mark of success. So going into your foundational resilience course that you recently launched, can you talk more about that and the intent of it and what people should see as the objectives or the outcomes of participating in a training like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the experience of the last 5 years has been that if you work in an organization, you are lucky if your learning and development team give you access to a 1-hour webinar on, how to sustain our personal resilience, or for leaders on how do we create environments in which people are well and resilient and can thrive. And so many of our clients, have actually been really proactive and have really invested in this area. But even for them, let's say you're a business with 1,500 people, maximum 200 to 300 people ever really get to benefit from workshops or even one-to-one leadership coaching in this area. And I very quickly realized that actually that just felt really unequitable. And it's the traditional model of learning and development, right? Which is that if you're going to pay for someone to get trained, you're going to put them in a workshop environment. It's not financially possible to do that for everyone. And so the thoughts started to emerge when a few clients said, look, but how do we scale this enterprise wide? How do we ensure that every single employee, whether it's part of their onboarding experience as soon as they join us, or whether it's actually a targeted learning piece that we do throughout their journey with us, has access to a resource where they can reflect on their own resilience? So what is it that is resilience? and then reflect on how does my resilience show up and what have I tended to rely on in terms of skills and behaviors and strategies when I've been under pressure or I've been challenged, and what does that mean for what I've learned about myself? And then finally, what are some additional strategies that we could equip people with, just so that actually there becomes a common language and framework and set of ways of talking about resilience that become part of the culture. Because otherwise, as we know, even from an operational organizational perspective, one leader's saying, well, I think resilience is you toughing it all out. Another leader will say, well, it's not. It's knowing when to ask for help. And so then you've got these two camps, two cultures about what resilience means. And I think for us, this foundation course, which is essentially an on-demand e-learning course, is really about taking this consistent framework, language and terminology to the whole organization, knowing that actually for some parts of the organization, this might be something that helps them because they're navigating a very significant digital transformation program with some really, really tough deadlines. Mm-hmm. Or it could be actually something that's used universally because, as you quite rightly said, we're seeing what we're calling in the UK a cost of living crisis, economic recession, and everyone is
here in the US too.
Yeah. So it's something that we feel everyone wants to have access to. Yeah. So that's really the way that why we've developed it, and then what we hope it's going to create. And I think that, even if just taking an e-learning course is the beginning of a conversation in organizations around, okay, so what's the leadership role here? What's the cultural environment got to look like in order for people to feel flexible enough to deal with these challenges and have the support they need? And I think one of the biggest challenges right now is just that every organization on this planet is probably, every commercial organization on this planet is probably asking its people to do more with less right now. Yeah. And that is one of the biggest challenges to resilience that we all see at a human level, which is that how can we operate and how can we be flexible when actually we're operating way past our peak level of performance? We're in a very high stress zone. And I think until we kind of resolve that, these courses can only be one part of a wider solution. But I think our approach working with clients is that it's never just about dropping a course or a training program into an organization. It's understanding what is the team context here, what's the leadership context, and what is the organization prepared to do and prepared to change about the way it's working and the goals it can't potentially achieve, because we need to be taking our people with us in a way that respects their health and well-being and their resilience.
So I like that. It's just not a training that you can push out there and expect to get full value from, but it sounds like a system of support around that as well. And I would say continuous improvement is probably a big part of that, of continuing to iterate through that with employees across an organization. So with that, one thing I'd really like to know, looking at 2023, how do you think companies can build their resilience? Obviously, they can tap into resources that like what your company provides, but do you have any other tips for organizations out there or practitioners that they can really bring to leadership?
I think there's something you said earlier about business as usual, right? And I think the last few years have been a lesson from most organizations that things are no longer business as usual. Yeah. And the hopes we had that things might return to some kind of business as usual, not happening, right? So with that in mind, recognizing that certain ways of leading or certain ways of working or certain ways of supporting are probably not going to address the new challenges, the new needs. What is it that we need to be doing differently? And I suppose my invitation to leaders and organizations is to do the lessons learned. I think so many organizations are, of course, spending so much time constantly firefighting, whether it's around poor well-being or whether it's around their actual resilience capability in a specific business unit or a function or a service line, that they're not really taking the time to think about everything that has potentially gone well in the last 2 years, the things that they have learned about themselves, the things that they've learned about their teams, the things that they've learned about how their organizations can work differently and be more agile. How do we move that through into 2023 so that the way that we address challenges in 2023 is stronger, wiser, and more able than we would have done it 2 years ago?
Absolutely. Well, hey, it has been great to talk to you, and just wanted to remind the audience to please like and subscribe so that I can bring you more great content like this. And hey, as we wrap up today, could you share anything with the audience that maybe we haven't talked about yet that you really want people to take away from this conversation today?
Okay, that's a great invitation. Thank you. Because there's always something that I go, oh, yeah, I didn't say that, right? I think, we've talked a lot today about, the fact that resilience is ultimately not about placing responsibility purely on an employee, and it's creating a culture and leaders working in a certain way. I think the second thing that I'd like to clarify, because I think this gets misunderstood a lot, is when people use the words well-being and resilience interchangeably. So they talk about resilience as if, well, I've had my sleep, I've eaten my 3 meals, I've been for a run, I'm resilient. Yeah. And when you think about that definition of resilience being flexibility, one of the key aspects I see missing in many organizations' approach to developing personal resilience and employee resilience is that they focus so much on well-being, which of course is a foundation. If you and I eat well and sleep well and exercise, we're definitely going to have a high level of well-being to start with potentially. But it's still about resilience really is about the way that we frame and position and bring perspective to the situations, the challenges, the opportunities, the resources and capabilities we have around us. And so a lot of the work that I end up doing with people, and I would really encourage them to take away as perhaps one action from today, is to really notice when they are automatically in a certain situation and their default way of thinking is, this is going to be a nightmare. There's no way I can do this. This is going to be the end of the project. This is going to be the end of my career. We all have very hardwired, natural, sometimes negative ways of thinking. Now, they are a really healthy and important part of being human. They're telling us that we're under stress and we're under pressure and something might be wrong. But it's also really important for us to be able to step back from those thoughts and challenge and coach ourselves through them to see whether that is actually the situation or whether actually we can do this. There is a way of going and speaking to someone that can make something happen. There is a way of coping with this situation if we talk to people about it. I think for me, really, resilience in 2023 is recognizing the stories we tell ourselves, about our resilience, recognizing that, there are definitely times when we have reached our limits and we need support and we need to step back. We need to say no to things and we need to be clearer in our boundaries. And at the same time, also recognize that there will be challenges next year and there will be opportunities, that there will be threats and there will potentially also be solutions. And how can we go into that year being more confident in our ability to see the full picture? That's, I think, what's really going to help us to sustain this resilience into the future.
That's a great message. Aarti, how can people contact you and how can they learn more about Before 9?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, which is www.before9.co.uk. Feel free to reach out to me if we're not already connected on LinkedIn, Dr. Aarti Anhal. Follow the company page on LinkedIn, Before 9, or even if you're on Instagram, you can follow us on Instagram as well, Before 9 Official. Many different ways. And I really look forward to being able to continue the conversation. But thank you so much for having me. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for being here.